What a mega week, on top of some exciting outcomes in round 9 of the 2023 Major League Rugby season that saw a historic number of points scored. Some fantasy MLR managers had themselves a week, couple of them topping triple-digit points scored in their matchups. We break down the past weekend's games that led to the historic number of points, talk about the top fantasy players in the week, and of course look ahead to round 10. The Fantasy Ruckers show starts right now.
Where rugby and the world of fantasy sports collide. Welcome to the Fantasy Ruckers Show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, talking all things rugby from the MLR to leagues around the world. We're on top of it. Headphones on, pads off. This is the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Now, here are your hosts, Ryan Yee, Matt Yee, and Devin Vanderpool.
What's up, everybody? This is episode number 62 of the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Thank you so much to our Fantasy Ruckers League members, community members, and everyone else tagging along on this journey of trying to make fantasy rugby a reality in the MLR. And we said it in the teaser, what a mega week it was in round 9 of the 2023 Major League Rugby season. A whole bunch of points scored, a whole bunch of upsets, all bids well for the world of fantasy MLR. We're going to break it all down here on episode 62 of the Fantasy Ruckers Show, talk about the exciting round 9 that was, talk about the top performers that contributed to the crazy number of points scored, and of course look ahead to round 10. But two guys that have been taking advantage of the good week that was in round 9, Matt Yee and our other host Devin Vanderpool. Seems like the good times keep on rolling for you guys.
Yeah, I mean, they keep on rolling, and it's unfortunate that Vandy can't be here with us today. I mean, look, that guy, and we're going to touch on him a lot because you know, he scored the highest amount of points this week, and we'll get to that, Ryan. You'll get to that, obviously. But, you know, shout out to that. Also, the fact that two of his favorite teams pulled out also got dubbed this weekend. So, you know, we're talking about the one and true beloved, his first love in the MLR, the San Diego Legion. They got the win, right? And then his second love, kind of the side chick, kind of the person on the side that he pretends to be a fan of, the Utah Warriors, also got a huge win over the week. I mean, Vandy's just rolling in. I'm sure the reason that he actually couldn't come is because he's too busy celebrating and drinking. So.
Yeah, it was all good times for him. Yeah, and we'll keep on. I know that it's funny. He's obviously a diehard Utah Warriors fan, but I do agree he does have a special place for him in San Diego. But again, we're gonna break that all down, talk about the crazy matchups that happened in round 9, and again, it all made for a very, very exciting week in fantasy MLR in round 9. So we're gonna really break down all that stuff in this episode. But obviously, before we get to any of that, a little bit of housekeeping stuff here. If you're not already, make sure you're following us at the Fantasy Ruckers. All the tags are there up above if you're watching on the YouTube video, in the description if you're listening on the podcast portion as well. A whole bunch of fun fantasy content coming out on all those different channels. If that's not enough for you, you can also join our Discord channel as well. We've been having a lot of fun communicating with the Fantasy MLR community that we're slowly growing there. A whole bunch of people starting to join that. It's been a lot of fun kind of interacting with that. A really good sign for the growth of trying to make fantasy MLR a reality in this league. And of course, we got to mention, this is the first season that we've had it, thefantasyruckers.com. Been a super helpful resource for us for the Fantasy Ruckers League that we will get into and talk about the latest happenings in that league. But if you're just a stats junkie, not even from a fantasy perspective either, if you just want to look at how players are doing in the league and the numbers that they're tallying up, thefantasyruckers.com is the perfect place to go do that. So go make sure you check that out as well. So I guess with how much we got going on and the number of stuff that we got to break down here, Matt, we might as well get right into it, and we might as well start talking about some latest news and notes. And I want to start off by the biggest thing here, tweeted out by one of the most reliable sources when it comes to North American rugby, Brian Ray at Ray's Rugby on Twitter, announcing this week that it was the sign and trade deadline earlier this week.
Sounds like they're calling.
Yeah, it sounds like it. They want to get
they perfectly. You know, they're calling up for the deadline. I believe it was yesterday, so they might be a little bit late. But hey, you might be a good signing for the squad.
There you go. There, I wish. I wish that I could still be playing to be in consideration there. But there are other guys that were in consideration, of course, and it seems like there's a whole bunch of rumors that are going around this league right now in terms of guys that could be in a brand new jersey in the near future.
Yeah, I mean the sign and trade down. I believe he announced it was yesterday. Confirmed that with Jam
And I
delay.
want to clarify, it
Um,
was Monday.
Monday. Sorry, I got my dates all mixed up. Jam delay. Yeah, it was Monday. But you know how the MLR works. Things are always slow. We'll kind of see things start trickling in. We're even seeing things coming from different sources every other day. So yeah, I mean, there's lots to talk about. Even signings throughout the past week, we kind of saw everything leading up to this.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about some of those signings that built up to this week, and then Matt, you can kind of break it down in terms of what
Yep.
this type of impact it'll have. Some pretty cool international signings. I'll start off with Manate Akui. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. Signed by Rugby New York, a Kenyan-born South Sudanese player, back rower. Should be interesting to see what he does for the New York Ironworkers. We also got Tamiwa Agong
Hey,
Bongbon. He
you
is,
tried. You
I
tried.
tried there. Back rower as well, going to the Houston Sabercats, part of that English Premiership academy system there. Katan Ojo also going to the Houston Sabercats, also within the English Premiership academies. And then we also got Justice Nakombua, a lock, who will be going to the Chicago Hounds as well. And then we also got Old Glory DC signing a New Zealander, Nico Jones, as well. He has obviously experience playing overseas, spent time with Moana Pacifica and Auckland Rugby, and then also just recently the Seattle Seawolves adding Matt Turner as well. So out of all those signings there, Matt, what kind of stands out to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We already saw some of these guys get put into the lineup. You know, Manate Akui, the guy's coming from low, like he's from Kenya, but I guess he was playing for the New York Old Blues, tearing it up for them. And kind of that was his pathway to be on the New York Ironworkers. The other one that I think is interesting, Justice Nkombua, actually Chicago born, and moved to South Africa. So that'll be interesting. It's kind of like he's coming home in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, we already saw Matt Turner kind of have a few minutes on the weekend with the Seattle Seawolves. I think this, you know, it'll be interesting to see what this Nico Jones signing looks like, just because, you know, we're going to get into it, but the back row for the Old Glory DC team seems
It's kind of busy.
more than solid because they are getting some depth and they're getting some peak performance from those guys.
And I think out of all of the signings that I just listed, I would say from a fantasy perspective, I would probably look at Nico Jones. If I had to put my money on it, as the guy that would probably have the most potential to have a fantasy impact. It's
Yeah,
tough because Old Glory DC is a little bit busy in that back row, but they are trying to build up depth there. Obviously, they just signed the former LA Giltinis player, Langi Hapukuai, I think is
awesome
how you
next.
say it. And obviously they already have Jamison Fanana Schultz there as well, Lataro Bavaro
It's
as well as there. There's a lot of moving parts there, but if Nico
yeah.
Jones can find himself in that starting lineup, it'll be interesting to see how he can kind of translate that to fantasy impact.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of these guys are kind of depth signings in some ways. But, you know, we always have the signings that surprise us. And this doesn't seem to be any of the big signings like we saw last year. But I wonder if that already kind of happened in the offseason, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like we're still waiting for that big sign to kind of happen
Yeah.
again. We mentioned it last episode.
And
Obviously, we had Waisaki Naholo last year, Nehe Miller Scudder last year as well, where just guys had to drop so much fab on them because it was just a one of a kind of opportunity to add a guy that you knew was going to have so much fantasy impact in the starting lineup. Still waiting for that this season. We'll see whether or not that does eventually happen.
And with the sign and trade deadline, Ryan, you know, we always got rumors. We love rumors, but we got to bring them up. We got to let the people know about what's going on in the league. One of them, I don't think this is as much as a rumor as actually somewhat of an announcement from America Rugby News. Ruben DeHaas, American international, who has been starting for the Saracens, has been in the Saracens lineup, is now moving to the Cheetahs in South Africa. But in between that, it looks like he's going to be having a stint in the MLR for a short-term contract. So it'll be interesting to see where he goes. Rumor has it he goes to Houston with a South African name like that. I think Stephen Lowen said in the chat, or Jam Delay, with a South African name like that, there's only one place you can go, and that's the Houston Saber box. You know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, and the other thing, I mean, Rugby Morning posted, I don't know if he's just stirring stuff up, trying to make me feel bad because I've got literally negative fab in our league. But apparently, Bodine Waka may be coming back for a short term contract stint. So we'll see what happens there. Those are two, Ryan, that we know will definitely have a fantasy impact moving forward for the rest of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when we talk about the news, as we wrap this news and notes segment up, there are kind of two split kind of views when it comes to those types of signings. I think the guys that we just mentioned that are solidified, that have been announced, those are guys that you're possibly looking for as streamers of the week. You know what I mean? If you find them in a starting lineup, you maybe not be dropping a whole bunch of fab on these guys or any fab at all. But if you see some of these guys cracking into the starting lineup and you're in need of a back row player, you're in need of a lock 1 week, why not take a chance on a guy that has some overseas experience in a week? You never know what possibly the impact that he can have from a fantasy perspective. And then shifting over to guys like you're saying, Ruben De Haas, and maybe a potential return by Bodine Waka. Those are the signs that we're mentioning that they could be mid-season winners if you're able to collect a guy like that who's going to have solidified impact on the field. It could bode well there, and it might be worth putting that extra fab buck down on it. So again, the sign and trade deadline on Monday. I'm sure we'll hear a bunch of stuff that trickles out throughout this week post this episode, and it'll be interesting to see where that all lines up.
Frankly, Ryan, with the history of the MLR, I wouldn't be surprised if it wasn't actually the sign deadline. Maybe it's a trade deadline, but they just told everybody it's a sign deadline, but you can actually sign some more.
Who knows? But if there's one guy that I trust, it's Brian Ray. So there is that. So, but nonetheless, keep an eye out, obviously, on the wires because, if any more signing and trading happenings during this week, of course, it's going to have some sort of fantasy impact. The scale of which it's going to have may differ, but nonetheless, it will have some sort of impact on the landscape of Fantasy MLR and Fantasy MLR squads across the league. But I guess now it's time to start talking about that league. Matt, you ready for a little bit of an update?
Oh, we have to.
All right, here we go.
Oh, love these trumpets.
Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye, hear ye.
Hear ye, hear ye. Here is Commissioner Yee with a Fantasy Ruckers League update. And I mean, we got to get right into it and start talking about how this crazy round 9, with the amount of points that were scored in the real world of Fantasy MLR, really impacting and trickling down and impacting the world of Fantasy MLR as well. Just a crazy number of points. And I mean, I guess I gotta shout you guys out first. Matt, Vandy, our hosts here on the Fantasy Ruckers Show, racking up the most points this week. But I think the biggest shout out has to go to Vandy, who has been kind of struggling at the start of this Fantasy Rucker season, puts up the highest point total of the week, one of the highest point totals this season so far, with 116.5 total points.
I'm pretty sure it is the highest.
Is it the highest?
This far. It is the highest.
Okay.
It beats me out by my last highest of 114. So, kudos to Vandy.
It's impressive.
It is impressive. It definitely is. And, his team went off this week. I love it to hear it for Vandy. That battle for 5th and 6th place, I was looking at the standings, and we're going to go through it, Ryan. You're going to go through it. It is just getting spicier and spicier as the week goes on.
Yeah, no kidding. And it's kind of mirroring right now how the MLR is kind of looking, because the playoff race within the MLR is also getting very, very spicy. And here it's no different in the Fantasy Ruckers League as well. Again, reminder to all of our followers of the league and our league members, it is the top 6 teams that make the playoffs for the Fantasy Ruckers League, and that hunt is getting closer and closer and closer. But let's break down the matchups that happen in round 9 from a fantasy perspective from when it comes to our league members. The first matchup of the week, Feral Hippie, Stephen Lowen taking on Rugby Wrap-Up, Matt McCarthy. Taking care of business there, 92.7 to 60.1. Rugby Wrap-Up, I guess really, we've talked about it before. He has a whole bunch of stock in the New York Ironworkers. They fell short against Old Glory DC. Not the best match by the New York Ironworkers, and obviously that reflects that in that performance there with Rugby Wrap-Up squad. Moving on to the next matchup, I mean, MLR All Access and Gimme the Loots is still continuing to struggle, still searching for that first win in their existence of Fantasy MLR. They fall short to Rugby Morning, 79.7 to 62.3. I know Fitzy will like that victory there. But I guess we have our own Dallas Jackals kind of Chicago Hounds situation going there with MLR All Access. So we'll see whether or not they can continue to try to work.
Toronto Arrows.
Or Toronto Arrows, which we'll get to, which was pretty embarrassing stuff there. And we mentioned it. The Rucking Goat, Devin Vandy Vanderpool. Again, I wish we could have him on the show here to hear what he had to say about this, but to put up the highest point total in the history of the Fantasy Ruckers League, 116.5 total points, was an absolute smacking against Bill Baker and his Eagles overseas team, 65.5, never even came close. Obviously, Vandy taking advantage of the Utah Warriors guys that he has on his team there. Was pretty impressive stuff for a guy that has been struggling at the starting part of the season. He's slowly starting to build his way up and starting to look kind of scary, kind of like what the Utah Warriors are actually doing, where they kind of were a little bit mediocre at the start of the season. Now they seem to be completely rolling after their big upset in round 9, but we'll obviously break that down a little bit closer. You had a little bit of a tighter matchup there, taking on Dankus Anchors Hokie, winning 103.6 to 92.3. I knew you were texting me saying you were a little bit nervous about kind of everything was going on, especially with some of the Free Jacks players that Dankus Anchors has.
Yeah, I mean, I was ready to, like, after that New England Free Jacks game, I was ready to say, all right, hey, look, it wasn't my week, only once a year, every season there's going to be a historical game, and this just happens to be the one, happens to be his week. But hey, the boys pulled through. Even though half of them are hurt now, they pulled through. They got me the dub, over 100 points. So I'll take it, sitting pretty at the top of the table.
And that's back-to-back weeks, Matt, where you felt kind of nervous and you've come out with victories in the end. I don't know. I feel like it's pretty crazy, though, the fact where you're sitting right now. You're slowly starting to pull away with things. And I think every single week you can go in with an expectation right now, at least the way that your team has been playing, that you can be pretty confident in getting some sort of result out of the matchup. And then the last matchup here between our latest Fantasy MLR champion, the guy that has the only name on our Fantasy Ruckers championship jersey right now, Lads on Tour, who was in the hunt with you for a brief period of time there for a top spot in the Fantasy Ruckers League, falls short. And that race is looking, that's what I'm saying, you're pulling a little bit away there. Falls short by 4 points against James Dealey's MLR stats, 77.7 to 73.7. Interesting enough, MLR stats kind of has a lot of stock in the Toronto team. I think some of the injuries kind of helped in terms of him not having to start some of those guys. Obviously, Sam Malcolm didn't make an appearance in that Toronto game, so he didn't have to lean on that as well. So maybe it actually helped him in the long run, at least from a fantasy perspective. But coming out on top there over Lads on Tour, beating the latest MLR champion, which makes the standings a whole much more interesting here. So let's break down some of these standings now. Again, you are rucking and rolling, Matt, because you are now 8-1, and your fantasy point total is absolutely incredible. 808.6 total fantasy points on the season so far. And it's not that not that you have the lowest fantasy points against either, which has been updated on our website. Alistair, got to give a shout out to Alistair, continues to update the website, and more ways that we're digesting these stats are being added to this fantasyruckers.com website. Again, you can check it out there at thefantasyruckers.com. But yeah, you're 8-0-1, Matt. Pretty impressive stuff. Coming out behind you now in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th spot, all tied at 6-3 records. We got Rugby Morning at 2nd place. Lads on Tour falls to 3rd place. And now James Dealey working his way up, now 6-3 record, finds himself in the 4th spot.
Yeah, that is crazy. I mean, the fact that some of those underdogs were kind of just Rugby Morning got the win, but MLR Stats pulling that win from behind, that was a huge win for him to get him up into the top 4.
Yeah, pretty impressive stuff. And then now the hunt for the final playoff spot in the final playoff spots, 5th and 6th place. We got 3 teams tied with a 4-5 record. Feral Hippies, Rugby, or 4 teams, I should say. That's right. Can't forget about Vandy, who's making a hunt here.
Forget about Vandy, Rob.
Feral Hippies, Rugby Wrap Up, Dankus Anchors, and Vandy's team, the Rucking Goat, all tied with a 4-5 record. Feral Hippies, because of the total fantasy points scored, sits at that 5th spot. Rugby Wrap Up at the 6th spot. Dankus Anchors at the 7th, and the Rucking Goat at the 8th spot. So pretty tight race there for those last 2 spots. It's going to come down to the wire, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like deja vu to last year where we had this exact same thing, this fight for the last spot. I mean, I wasn't part of it last year. Deja vu, not part of it this year either. I'm just on the other side. But no, I'm we love this in fantasy leagues. Keeps it exciting. Keeps you on the edge of your seat to figure out, hey, who am I going to play in that 6th seed?
Exactly. And it puts so much on the line as well, especially as there's less and less weeks for teams to kind of make that comeback. It really just puts the importance of getting a result each and every week from a fantasy perspective that much more important. It's going to be, I have a feeling, like I said, going to be going down to the wire. And then our final 2 spots, again, not out of it. Eagles overseas Bill Baker at a 3-6 record. With how close it is, he could find himself right back in the playoff hunt as well, sitting at that 9th spot. And then again, like we mentioned, MLR All Access with their Gimme the Loots team struggling a little bit here. First fantasy season, I will say, but they're still hunting for their first win there, 0-9 there on the season. So basically, outside of kind of the outliers there between you and MLR All Access at the top and bottom, that middle stretch there is really, really exciting.
Yeah, super exciting, and definitely it's exciting that people can honestly watch this every week and see how it's going. So they can listen to us, they can come to the website, they can see who's moving up, who's moving down. They can pick somebody to cheer for if they really wanted to. So um,
Exactly.
I would cheer for Vandy, if you're not already cheering for me.
There, no bias there. No bias there. And yeah, again, check the fantasyruckers.com. Like Matt said, it's all there for you to digest both the fantasy side of things and also just the number sides of things as well, which we'll get into here in just a moment time as we break down these games. Last announcement I want to make for our league members here for the Fantasy Ruckers League is that we are starting to approach this, what do you want to call it? Buy-mageddon? I'll call it
Yeah, I don't even
Buy-mageddon.
know.
Let's
Maybe
call it
just bad
Buy-mageddon.
scheduling,
So the
poor
next
operations,
for those who
lack
may
of
not
thought.
for those who may not know, in rounds 11 and 12 of the MLR season, it seems like there are going to be 4 teams on bye in those 2 weeks. And for those of you who have been following the league, you guys know that there is a defensive set piece bonus point that we do play with. But there are 10 teams in our league with only 12 teams being in the MLR. So we can't afford to have any more than 2 teams on bye. But apparently this week, they decided to double that number and go with 4. So for our league members, we're going to continue to have that conversation on how to approach this. But I do get the feeling that it sounds like we will be eliminating the set piece bonus point position impact during those weeks to give everyone an even playing field. But again, as commissioner, we'll put that kind of in a conversation within the league Discord chat and have that discussion on what the best way to approach that is.
Just to clarify, this is not this upcoming week, week 10. This is week 11 and 12 that we're going to see this awful scheduling and the MLR not realizing that they can actually choose how they schedule the games.
Yeah, so we'll see how that goes. But again, we'll mention it once again next week on that episode. But hey, we got a full slate of games in round 10. Also had a full slate of games in round 9 as well. So Matt, let's start getting into these round 9 matches because man, it was super exciting stuff.
This first one, we can just go right through it real quick, You know what I mean? Like, all our stats is going to want us to go through this one real quick. I honestly have a couple points I want to bring up, but let's get into it, right?
Yeah, and if you guys weren't aware, a historic point scoring performance there by the New England Free Jacks against the Toronto Arrows. The first matchup to open up the week on Saturday, 6 o'clock Eastern time, 80-5 victory. And if I'm citing James Dealey correct on Twitter, he said that it's the most points scored ever by an MLR team, averaging obviously 1 point a minute, which is insane to think about. The Free Jacks just racking it up against the Toronto Arrows.
Yeah, that was ridiculous to watch. It was honestly just so ridiculous to watch. But I don't want to spend too much time on it just because I don't even know. Like, the Arrows have basically a team that could start in the MLR on the injured reserve. That mixed with, they're not playing great. We expected a lot more out of them at home. And honestly, to see this type of showing at home in Toronto, it was surprising to say the least. And I thought at some point they would turn it around and start, clicking in, but it just never happened for them. And I mean, all around, nothing went their way. They didn't get their way with the penalties. They didn't get their way with turnovers, tackles, like anything, offensively, defensively. It was all tough. But yeah.
Yeah, I'm not going to really touch on. There's really no one that was fantasy relevant on the Toronto Arrows squad. I think the best player that you could probably mention is maybe Lucas Rumble, who racked up 12 tackles. But again, even that is not even that fantasy relevant. I do want to talk about when you see 80 points, and this is part of Matthew's fear when he was going to his matchup with the number of New England Free Jacks that Dankus Anchors does have in his squad. When you score 80 points, there's a whole lot of fantasy performance to be had. So let me roll through some of these players
before we get there, right? I do want to say a couple things just about the game.
You said you didn't want to talk about it.
No. I said I had 2 points. I said I had 2 points. One, I think Lucas Rumble, he's Captain Canada, but listening into some of the stuff they talk about, the way that he's approaching the ref and talking to the ref, I think it's a little bit of a detriment. He's coming on a bit too aggressive, in my opinion, and I think it's hurting him. I think it's hard for him to get calls going his way because of the way that he's talking, because of the conversation and the tone that he's going with the ref. Just a small little nitpicky thing. We got to talk about the details here, Ryan. Mm-hmm. The other thing is, this game, some of the commentating regarding the cards and the penalties, I just think that if you're going to commentate and have an opinion on one of the yellow cards, some of the penalties, I'm not going to name names, who the commentators were, but Like, know the rules. Just know the rules so that you can accurately help people learn why things are yellow cards, why things are just a penalty, and also let the ref speak. Let the people listen to the ref. Anyways, that's what I had to say about it. It's nothing about the game. It's just really about some semantics.
You just got to vent that out, air some dirty laundry there, eh, man?
Yeah.
All right. Well, back to the fantasy perspective of things here with the New England Free Jacks. Again, really, so many points to be had here. You wanted a New England Free Jacks player this week, if you were going to have some sort of fantasy performance, big time fantasy performance there, in terms of your scoring output as part of your team. First guy I'll mention, LaRue Milan. Part of the reason why Vandy was able to reach that 116.4 fantasy point total. He's a guy that he's been waiting on. Obviously, has been dealing with injury towards the start of the season. 2 weeks ago, finally subbed on and dressed for the first time and made an impact. And that was that 2 weeks ago or last week?
Last week.
Last week. And then this week, in his first start of the season, racks up 94 meters and 2 tries scored. Even waiting, I guess now, 8 weeks in or 7 weeks in to see an appearance by LaRue Milan, you are already licking your chops there because you're excited what this guy can do for the rest of the season, despite having to deal with 7 weeks of him off and Vandy having drafted him in the first round.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a surprise that the fact that he drafted in the first round, you look at it now and it's like, this guy's winning Vandy weeks. And if he can do that for the rest of the season, hey, it'll be worth it.
Yeah, 22.6 total fantasy points on that 2 try performance. Pretty impressive stuff. Another guy I want to mention, a guy that, Matt, you obviously had been high on at the beginning when he was a waiver wire pickup. It was Paulo Balacana. I mean, super impressive stuff. 83 minutes played, 132 meters gained, a try scored, racking up to 20.6 fantasy points. This guy, I mean, if you're picking a guy like this on the waiver wire early in the season, this guy could be a league winner.
Yeah, I mean, I've said enough about him. The guy is continuing to perform. The guy continues to score tries. Just, always finds an opportunity and a way to get into that try zone.
Yeah, 5 out of 7 fantasy performances this far this season have hit double-digit points. 2 of those being above 20 points. 3 of those above 15. So pretty impressive stuff by him. And then rolling down the list as well in terms of other guys that made impact. I mean, John Poland, you love to see a scrum half score tries there as well. He was able to find the try zone. 10.9 fantasy points for him. For a scrum half position is pretty solid. And for him now, he has now hit double-digit point performances in 4 out of 7 matchups for him. And then I'm just going down the list here to see if anyone else is really of note.
I mean, tons of people scored points. I will bring up a guy, Ryan, a couple guys. Mitch Jacobson, I think he's starting to find form. The last 3 weeks, he's really been stepping it up in terms of fantasy performance, as well as just his play. I think this is kind of what we've wanted to expect from him, especially when we included him in our top 5. The other guy I need to shout out, the fact that he essentially won me my week, Jason Potros. 8 conversions. I mean, just ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous, and you love to see it. I will. That's all I got.
So I'll mention in terms of the fantasy point performance that those guys were able to get. You look at Potros, that's a 21.3 fantasy performance with that conversion kick. And when you can have a guy that is just that money from the boot, we're learning in fantasy that it's going to have a huge impact. He may not have those meters gained. He may not. He may score 1 try, but that boost that the kicking gives you is really impressive stuff. Mitch Jacobson, 12.7 fantasy points, not too bad showing there for him. I do want to mention Andrew Quattrin as well. Friend of the show. He did pretty well in this matchup. 2 tries, 30 meters gained there. And he's a guy that has been starting to solidify himself in the starting lineup for this New England Free Jacks squad. He started for the New England Free Jacks 3 times in a row. This is his biggest fantasy point performance of the season. First game that he's scoring not only multiple tries, but a try this season so far. 14.3 fantasy points for him. Nice to see him kind of starting to make a fantasy impact here.
Yep, 100%. And just last thing before we move on, tough go for the guy who dropped a lot of fab on Deshaun Bowen. All you have to do is listen to me. Let's move on.
That is true. All right, next matchup of the weekend, 8 o'clock Eastern time on the Saturday, Rugby Atlanta taking on NOLA Golden. What a shocking result. Obviously, I think we both predicted that NOLA was going to come away with this one, but Rugby Atlanta really showing some grit there and coming away with the victory.
Yeah, I mean, Rugby Atlanta actually looked really good. I thought Duncan Van Skalvik, I believe that's how you pronounce his name properly, is actually really drove the team around the pitch really well. I thought they were able to create a lot of offense. They looked a lot better than they have in the recent weeks. The other thing we have to talk about, though, is Nola really ran into a lot of injuries in that game. I mean, they struggled. At one point, they had both Damian Stevens and Luke Campbell on the field at one time. I think Tom Florence went off with an injury fairly early on, which is one of their key players. And just they were losing shape as that game went on, and they just couldn't, they never found their way back into it. So I think that's something important to note. But rough go for my my championship pick. I mean, that's 2 back-to-back losses, I believe. So yeah, we'll have to see. We'll have to see how they look moving forward.
All right, and then from a fantasy perspective for this NOLA side, I mean, you look at Jordan Jackson Hope. He did really well. 13.7 fantasy points there, adequate stuff, 93 meters gained, 13 tackles. When he finds himself in the lineup, it seems like he's a guy that does have a lot of fantasy impact. Quiet days there for JP Duplessis, and like you mentioned, Tom Florence dealing with what he was dealing with. Really, again, not really much. When you're only scoring 7 points, not much to be seen there for a fantasy perspective on Vanola's side.
The other bright spot is Pat O'Toole. I mean, pretty sure he sits on our waiver wire consistently, and he comes out with 11.8 points, 44 meters gain, 8 tackles, a try off the set piece, which was just beautiful. You know, he comes in and maybe even a guy that to look for. You look at the past kind of 4 weeks that he's played, 15.2, 8 points, 5.2, 11.8. Some guy that we were probably going to be talking about in our waiver wire segment.
Yeah. All right. And then looking at the Rugby Atlanta side, I mean, I guess we got to start off with the guy that you mentioned, Duncan Van Skalvik, looking very good. Again, the big part for him was the efficiency he had from the boot. For him, he was able to rack up, 2 conversion kicks, 2 penalties. Didn't really have that much of obviously a meters gain standpoint, but a solid 7-point performance there. At least gives you somewhat of a consistency standpoint for him. And then, going down the list, I mean, you look at Ruida Biddle, Rangatir Waitokia, both exceeding 75 meters gain there. It pretty solid stuff. But again, even when you look at Rugby Atlanta, really not much fantasy performance there as well. This was just a game that really wasn't translating to Fantasy MLR.
Yeah, I mean, I think this was the only game that didn't end up having an offensive bonus point, and from at least one of the teams, I believe. So. Yeah, this was the rare low-scoring game of the weekend, but just means a little less fantasy impact, but it didn't stop guys from getting fantasy impact elsewhere.
Yeah. All right, let's shift on over now to the next matchup of the weekend. The Dallas Jackals taking on the Houston SaberCats in Houston. Also was on Saturday at 8 o'clock Eastern time. SaberCats coming away with the victory with this one, 33-21 in the Battle of Texas.
Can I say something? It is impossible. I cannot focus on 2 games at once. I can't. I have one on the one screen, one on the other. I'm trying to look at both critically, and I can't. I don't know which way to look. It would be easy if one of the games was a New England Free Jack versus Toronto game. I could just turn that one off. But what am I supposed to do here? I mean, the Dallas Jackals were putting up a show against Houston. They were looking great. They were really putting it to really showing Houston, hey, we're not the same Dallas Jackals team from last year. The Dogs hate cats, and we're going to come and get you. And, they probably hate their space jersey too. So, I think the Dallas Jackals actually looked really good. They continue to impress every week. But, Houston is just a class team, and they found a way to end up on top.
And for me, at least from a fantasy perspective with these Dallas Jackals guys, I think the staples, at least from a fantasy production standpoint that you can really trust with this Dallas Jackals side is they're 2 key back row players, and that's Adrian Boyson and Sam Gala. These are 2 guys that have been racking up double-digit tackles consistently every single week. Adrian Boyson this past week, 14.2 fantasy points, 17 tackles, adds the try, 31 meters gain, has been consistent. He's been nearing around that double-digit point performance almost every single week. In the 8 weeks that he's appeared in, 5 of them have been above 10 points. and this one being his second highest fantasy performance this season. And then you look at Sam Gala, who's a guy that has been making a big change here. Obviously, he's been starting at that second row position. This is the first time this season that he started at the back row position, which should be interesting how that plays out, because obviously he lost the back row eligibility and now has his first game under the belt in the season where maybe he can see that return. Man, he would be deadly if he had, from a fantasy perspective, if he was able to retain a second row and back row eligibility there. But we'll see how that kind of plays out over the next few weeks. But hey, 12.6 fantasy points for him, racked up 16 tackles, added the try on 33 meters gain. Impressive stuff by the rookie.
Yeah, I mean, it was impressive to see him in that back row position. They had that new addition, Matthew Gordon, playing in the lock, playing at second row in place of him. And I mean, regardless of back row, regardless of second row, the guy finds a way to make an impact as a rookie. And this one, he comes in with a pretty nice try too as well.
And then on the Houston side of things, I mean, we talk about him pretty consistently on this show, and that's David Coetzer, because of how efficient he is from the boot. I mean, this past weekend, 4 conversion kicks has led to a 15.5 fantasy performance. He found a try as well, 42 meters gained. Again, this is a guy that has only missed out on double-digit performances twice this season so far, and now has gone 4 straight weeks with being above at least 13 points.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about him every week, and it's hard not to when he continues to perform. A guy that I want to talk about also, though, is Gideon Van Vick. I mean, the guy comes back, finds his way in the lineup, scores a crazy, long-distance try, breaking tackles, and then gets a red card and gets sent off. So, it's a tough go with that. His first game back, and then I guess he decided he didn't want to be on the field anymore, and just wanted to send himself off. We got to talk about it. Another guy who made his first game back in a while for Houston Sabercats is Veroniki Tico Solomone.
Yeah.
A guy who's been dropped by Vandy, I think, because he wasn't playing and we weren't sure whether he's injured or not. And he comes back and puts on a 14.7 point performance.
He might be a guy you're looking at on this waiver wire.
Yeah, he's going to be a guy that you're definitely going to be looking at and hoping that he's going to be in the lineup moving forward.
Yeah, hadn't appeared since round 4 of this season. Makes an appearance here in round 9 and backs it up with a 14.7 fantasy point performance, 89 meters gained, and a try as well. So pretty good stuff by him. And then just going on back to Gideon Van Vick, I mean, he would have had a double-digit point performance there, but with that red card with the -8 penalty that Cheese really just kind of X-nays that fantasy impact that he really has on that. Any more players that you want to touch on here in this Houston Sabercats Dallas Jackals matchup?
I don't think so. I think, the usual guys performed. Dean Muir obviously put a try in, no surprise there. I think somebody that I really like, though, on the Houston Sabercats side, and maybe I'm biased because I recently picked him up, and I was surprised to see him drop, was Drew Wild. I mean, the way that he is playing at fullback for them and the way that he's able to kind of make gain line and run with the ball with his footwork, for me, it looks very similar to a Duncan Matthews. That's a pretty high statement in terms of the MLR.
Yeah, and it's also when you have a guy that's willing to attack like that, at least from a fantasy perspective, it really makes it beneficial to have guys like that on your squad. Again, it's just the differing perspective when it comes to looking at the game from just a rugby success standpoint or fantasy MLR success standpoint. Makes it very, very interesting. All right, shifting over to the next game of the week here. The wraps up on Saturday. The Utah Warriors with the shocking result against the Seattle Seawolves. They come up with the upset win at home, 41-35, something that no one expected heading into this weekend.
Yeah, this was a crazy game. I mean, this was by far the best game of the week at the worst time, at least for the East Coast people. It was one of the best games of the week. It could be one of the best games of the season. It was just full of surprises. And the way that the Utah backline, the way the Utah offense is playing, I mean, Ryan, when I was watching this, all I could think about was you talk about how exciting the San Diego Legion offense is to watch. But then you watch this Utah Warriors offense these past few weeks. You watch the way that Joel Hodgson is really managing them around the field and the way that he's working with the guys outside of him, the way that there's not just him being a playmaker, but we're looking at Mika Kruse as well being a playmaker on the outside center. And this is all without Paul Lasike as well.
Right.
So it has just been, it is just incredible to watch. I think Utah is a team that we've been clearly sleeping on and we need to pay more attention to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this is also a Seattle Seawolves team that has looked kind of vulnerable over the past
Yeah.
few weeks. You look at, they come loss against Utah in round 9, a loss against San Diego in round 8, squeak away a win against NOLA in round 7. And then, it's they obviously had the win ahead of that against Chicago, which is expected. But just the past 3 weeks, they just haven't felt like they're that dominant Seattle Seawolves team that we were really thinking that they were at the start of the season.
Yeah, 100%, 100% agree. It is just, yeah, it's interesting. But I think the big one with this thing, and you got to key in, is some pretty major injuries. I mean, when you have Duncan Matthews playing at outside center, and yes, Dan Creel and Duncan Matthews have been a center pairing in the past in their past career in South Africa. But Duncan Matthews is in their outside center, and Duncan Matthews gets hurt. I think one of the front rows also got hurt, or one of the forwards got hurt fairly early, and they just don't really have the depth to be able to cover for that. And we saw that. I mean, Utah came in and just played a full 80 minutes, and some of the, majority of the Utah guys just played the full 80 minutes and kept hammering it down.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's get into some of the fantasy performances. Let's start with the Utah Warriors because there are a whole bunch of them that we can talk about. You talk about Mika Kruse and what he was able to do here. Second highest fantasy point score for the Utah Warriors this season so far.
Yeah.
Starts at the center position. Looking decent there. 110 meters gained, a try, 9 tackles, 20.7 fantasy points on the season.
Yeah, I mean,
Or excuse me, on that match there.
he's looking ridiculous. I mean, the way, whether you have him on outside center or wing, he's still able to make an impact regardless. Outside centering has the more ability to be a little bit more of a distributor and a ball threat. And then on the wing, he just has the ability to score tries and break the line. So, yeah, it has just been a sight to see watching him play.
And then I will say, I mean, after obviously the injury scare that happened in round 7, taking round 8 off, Joe Mono returning to the starting lineup and looking pretty solid. 108 meters gained, a try for a 13.1 fantasy point performance.
Yeah. Another week, Joe Mono scores another try. You give him the ball, you give him some space. He's going to do something with it, and you're going to pay.
Some other guys got to mention Lance Williams looking good. Thomas Tuivau looking also good. Matt, you mentioned Joel Hodgson too. Just so many different guys here on this Utah team that really, really came through for you for this fantasy week.
Yeah, I mean, let's also talk about Cliven Lobster as well. First week starting at fullback for them. Is this going to be something moving forward where we see Caleb McKean on the wing, Cliven Lobster at fullback? I mean, they just beat Seattle Seawolves. Yeah, probably we're going to continue to see this. And Cliven Lobster got 15.3 fantasy points, and he looked great.
Yeah, in his first start of the season too. So we'll see how kind of that shakes up as well. All right, let's shift over to kind of the Seattle side of things. As opposed to, again, obviously lots of points scored when it's a 41-35 victory. So there's going to be a whole lot of fantasy implication. The biggest guy I want to mention is Liana Futi. He looked really, really good. 132 meters gained, 1 try, 20.7 fantasy points. He was a guy that really came through there for you from the fantasy side of things.
Yeah, I mean, he is a short man. Well, it looks like it from the TV, but this guy breaks tackles. I mean, the power that he runs with is just ridiculous, and he, you think he doesn't have much space. You think he's gonna get stopped and tackled. Then he breaks a tackle and makes another 20 meters. It is just a fantasy dream to have that guy in your squad.
Absolutely. And a guy that kind of has been sneaky kind of good here from a fantasy perspective on the Seattle Seawolves team has been Charles Elton. I mean, Charles Elton, 3 straight weeks now, has come away with double-digit fantasy point performances. In round 9, 13.6 fantasy points, 52 meters gained. Didn't even score a try, but racks up 18 tackles along with a breakdown steal. He's a guy that you really didn't think was going to have that much fantasy impact this season with kind of the crowded back row that Seattle had with, Ronan Foley there being the initial kind of talk there. He's obviously dealing with injury stuff. Reichert Hadding always overshadows kind of the fantasy side of things when it comes to that Seattle back row. But Charles Elton looking pretty solid.
Yeah, he looked really good. I really liked the way that he played. You love to see those guys racking up tackles.
And since I bring it up, is there concern with Reichert Hadding now? Because obviously he opened up the season really, really well. He had rounds 2, rounds 3, rounds 4 exceeding 15 total fantasy points. But now basically for the past 3 rounds, hasn't found himself in the try zone, and it's shown in his fantasy output, really not doing that much for the guy that was selected as, I believe, the 2nd overall pick in our Fantasy MLR draft.
Yeah, I mean, look, sometimes things wear off, right? Things you
Oh my God.
things you put in your butt. I mean, everything has a time limit to wear off once you get to stop taking them, right? No, but on a serious note, I think in the past the past 3 games, I've just realized that he doesn't seem to be able to find himself or isn't able to get in some of those positions that he used to be in where he just kind of ends up in the right spot at the right time. It just seems like those opportunities aren't arising as much. And I don't think that's a factor of him because I think he's still creating things. I mean, you saw the try assist last week. He's still able to create some offense. It's just a little bit more difficult. I think it's more of a product of the way the team's playing. And we've kind of seen this with the Seattle Seawolves of them, like you said while we were talking about this, a little shaky, a little not knowing how they're doing, not the same Seattle Seawolves that we expect.
All right, now let's shift over to the first match of Sunday. Another kind of shocking result between Old Glory DC and the New York Ironworkers, 3 o'clock Eastern matchup. And the confidence in this New York Ironworkers side has slowly been diminishing in terms of the way that they've been playing so far this season for being the 2022 MLR champions. Old Glory DC, a character win here, down 24-12 at half, end up getting the victory here, 42-31 at home.
I mean, watching that, I watched the first half and just seeing the way that Rugby New York or New York Ironworkers, whatever, that they were kind of, dominating the first half in my eyes. They were really holding possession of the ball. They looked good. I thought, hey, this is just going to be another one of those, Rugby New York pulls out the win. But no, Old Glory DC came out in that second half, really showed up. And I think that just showed the amount of injuries that Rugby New York are running into. You have Dylan Fawcett starting at 8. Yes, he's been there before, but you only do that out of desperation. Jason Emery started at 10. Yes, he did that in the playoffs. But again, when you have injuries to Jack Hyden, that's a tough one. That's a tough one to have. And they're still running through a bunch of injuries now that they're trying to work through. But great win for Old Glory DC. That's what happens when you put a guy at 8 that has a massive and unreal neck tattoo. You're just going to come out with 10% more confidence and a 20% more chance of winning.
And I mean, that back row completely changes with Langy there now, right? Because given their now flexibility of being able to move, which is a guy that we'll talk about here from a fantasy perspective, because he looked very, very good at that flanker position. When you move Jamison Fainana Schultz there to the flanker position, giving him kind of, I guess, the extra energy there. I mean, if you're diminishing your ball carries from that 8 position by a little bit, just giving you that little bit of extra gas in the tank towards the tail end of the match, and he was able to take advantage in that one with Langy taking over that 8 spot. I mean, Jamison Fainana Schultz, 21 fantasy points in this match, 103 meters gained. We've seen him typically do it from the tackle perspective, keeping him fantasy relevant. He's had double-digit tackles every single match that he's played in up to this game. He was close here in this one in round 9 with 9 tackles.
Instead of tackling guys, Ryan, he decided to absolutely slaughter and run over Andrew Coe like a bulldozer. So,
no kidding.
Like what is he? He doesn't have to tackle when he's just being the guy that's stopping everybody from tackling.
And honestly, it's not crazy to think about. And I would have been completely shocked if you had told me this at the beginning of the season. At this point in time, I'd rather have Jamison Fainana Schultz than Riker Hadding right now.
Yeah, 100%. I think the way that he's playing, I think honestly, you look at Tom Florence, I'd rather have Tom Florence over Riker Hadding as well. I think Jamison, the way that he's playing and the key factor that he has been in every game this season for Old Glory DC, win or loss, he's a guy that is a staple for every fantasy team.
Yeah, 6 out of 8 weeks, double-digit performances. He has gone above 12 points for the five straight weeks in a row, dating back to round 5. And this 21-point performance in round 9 is the highest of his season so far. So that's pretty impressive
if he
stuff.
Gets a neck tattoo, he can start at 8.
Yeah, but I will say though, that is a big thing though. I don't think it's a coincidence. I don't think it's a coincidence that him starting at the back at the flanker position instead in this one kind of merited to the more opportunity from the meters gained perspective. Seeing him not hit that double-digit tackle perspective, scoring the try in this one, I don't think it's just a coincidence there. There may be a little bit of a shift if he is going to starting at that flanker position now.
Well, we got to talk about then another flanker that had a massive week as well in Luataro Bavaro.
Yep.
I mean, he hasn't had the greatest season. I think he had the great first week and then he kind of slowed down. You expected big things out of him, but it just never came. But this week, I mean, he came out firing, 2 tries on the week, 23.1 fantasy points, 71 meters gained, throw a steal in there, throw 10 tackles in there. What a game from him. And I mean, I'm hoping that you can see this moving forward, but he's going to be another guy that we're going to talk about in that waiver wires.
Yeah, it's been a tough one for him so far. I mean, this is the first game that he's had scored a try. I mean, he did score 2 in round 9, but hasn't scored anything since round 1 when there was a lot of that hype building up with his Old Glory DC team after that Chicago match earlier on the season. But since then, hasn't really done much. Between round 4 and 8, really just hovering outside of 1 week around that 3-point fantasy performance range, which is why you see him available on the waiver wire. But yeah, like you mentioned, coming out with 23.1 in this one. It'll be interesting to see how the dynamic of that back row changes with Langy there. And now obviously they have the addition of Nico Jones as well. So kind of seeing how that all plays out will be interesting too.
And I think before we move on to Rugby New York, Ryan, it will be criminal for us to not mention William Talatena.
Yep. Yeah.
We have to mention him.
Impressive stuff.
Yeah. Another guy with 2 tries this week. I mean, you love to see it. You love to see multiple guys getting 2 tries.
I mean, since he's made his first appearance this season in round 4, he has gone 4 out of 6 weeks. He scored a try, this one being his first multi-try performance of the game. 20 fantasy points, 52 meters gained, 6 tackles. This is a guy that is looking pretty impressive here from a fantasy perspective.
And Furman Martinez got hurt early in that game, so let's see him continue to have a role at that outside center position as Threadon Polamalu sets in.
Yeah, a couple other guys are really good to see Kurt Baker back and kind of doing Kurt Baker things. I mean, didn't score a try in this one, but was able to rack up 132 meters gain, added 2 try assists as well, 17.4 fantasy points. He's a guy that is available on the waiver wire too, so maybe he's a guy that you consider there because obviously he's been away with injury. You expect him to be more established in this lineup as they move forward. Something to look at.
Yeah, a lot of handling errors, a lot of turnovers. Clearly didn't stop him there, but it was something that I did notice in his play.
Other guys scoring tries for Old Glory DC that had some sort of fantasy point performance. Penny Lasaka, Junior Sao as well. Those
good
guys also, definitely good to see them back. All right, switching over to the New York Ironworkers side of things. Really, from a fantasy perspective, I mean, you can throw in Jason Emery in there because of his kicking role duties. With the North. Yes. I was just about to get there, but first, Jason Emery, 16.2 fantasy points with that kicking. But yeah, the big one being Andrew Coe, who was able to score a big time try there, and led to a 20-point fantasy point performance. He's gone back-to-back weeks now with over 20 points scored, 122 meters gained in this one, and a try. Coe's looking to be in form, and again, was a big part of the reason why Vandy was able to hit that 116.4 total fantasy point threshold.
Yeah, but I think that's a small consolation for getting absolutely fucked by Banana Schultz.
Yeah, no kidding. And then looking outside there, again, you got Hamish Dalzell scoring a try. Dylan Fawcett, I want to mention, because, man, that guy is literally, I know they call him the butcher, but that guy's a Swiss Army knife, man. The fact that he's so effective at the hooker position, you slot him in at 8 position, not your prototypical looking 8 guy, and he goes in there and scores a try.
I mean, he plays the full 80 minutes. And the other thing that you got to note is even when he's playing 8, he's throwing the ball in and he's continuing to be the guy at the back of the maul. That's how he scored his try. It wasn't being an 8 man. He scored his try by essentially playing the hooker position. So, that is just utility that you'd love to have at your front row position. And we've seen it last year, and the fact that he's able to play 80 easy, that just bodes well for the future. And when big games start coming, you might be playing 80 more often.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Anything left with this Old Glory New York matchup that you want to talk about, Matt?
No, I think Rugby New Yorkers really hoping for guys like Ed Fido, Brendan O'Connor, Jack Hyden to all get back in that lineup.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, now let's shift over now to the last matchup of the weekend in round 9. San Diego Legion taking on the Chicago Hounds at home, coming away with the dominant victory there, 48-24. Again, you look at this matchup, and this is another one that on at least the San Diego side had pretty big time fantasy impact when it comes to the players that were involved there. But hey, some fantasy impact on the Chicago Hounds side as well.
Yeah, I mean, this was I honestly watching the first part of that game. I thought Chicago Hounds. I thought they were giving it to San Diego. Um, they seemed to be, really showing some form, really dominating. Looked like they were able to, you know, get some offense going, and it was a tight game going into that. I guess the first 10, 15 minutes, and then you kind of started to see San Diego just stretch it out, stretch the legs, start going. I think this league and the margin between the two teams, the score probably could have been bigger if the ref didn't call back two Nate Augsburger tries. But
Which is
that's
nuts
fine.
which is nuts to think
I still
about.
won anyways. I still won anyways. But yeah, it is. Those were interesting calls, but it just shows how good San Diego is.
Yeah, I mean they look electric, and again they're one of the teams that's I think honestly at this point of the season, and we're gonna get into these guys now, but just as it's on the top of my mind right now, I want San Diego players and I want Utah players. Those are the guys, the teams that seem to be playing the game style that is most complementary towards fantasy MLR point
Well, I
production.
mean, I would also throw New England Free Jack players in there
Sure.
because they're in form right now and they're coming off two big wins. So
I mean, how can you not when you put up 80 points, right? I guess.
that is true.
But all right, let's talk about San Diego Legion, some of the players on there. I mean, you can't start off the San Diego Legion and talking about fantasy MLR without mentioning Nate Augsburger. I mean, this guy is the number one fantasy point scorer right now in the entire league. It's insane. You look at his numbers, you look at his fantasy numbers. He hasn't
Ridiculous.
scored lower than 12 fantasy points. That was back in round 5. He has gone 3 straight weeks now with over 20 points scored. In this one in round 9, 24.6 fantasy points, 136 meters gained, add a try assist, add a try. This guy is doing everything for a guy that you originally drafted as your starting 9 and is now the best player at the back 3 position.
Yeah, I mean, all fantasy aside, like these are the guys you like to have where they are finding work on the field. Nate Augsburger continues. You watch the game. If you watch him in the back, you see him finding work on both wings, working across, tracking side to side. And the other thing is San Diego Legion. You see that with both the tries that got called back. They're looking to inject him into the offense, into the set piece plays, everything because of his speed, because of his footwork. He's just a guy that they can rely on to finish plays.
Yeah, and nice to see here Tapua Maafu Afungia. I mean,
nice.
it hasn't really been fantasy relevant so far this season, but
He came to play.
he came to play in this one. 126.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, right, him and that mullet, the big old mullet flying out the back. He was breaking tackles. He was making meters gained. He was, tackling people. It was wild to watch.
Yeah, 126 meters gained, a try, 16 tackles. 22.9 total fantasy points. That's exactly what you want to see, the opportunity there, and he looked electric in this matchup there. Shifting on to some other guys on this squad. I mean, it is cool to see. I will say, I always love seeing on the San Diego side, Ma'a Nanu appearing on the fantasy radar here and making an impact. It's just fun. It's just fun to see him doing things here in the MLR. 18.7 fantasy points, 71 minutes played, 80 meters gained, a try, 14 tackles, and a try assist.
You don't get to say his name often, Rye, and I love when he comes up. And this game was just classic. Thank you, Ma, for giving Nate Augsburger the try and the intercept. Appreciate you. He needed that. I needed that. And then you got it back. You got the meat pie yourself with a nice long distance try. You love to see it. I mean, he is just a sight to see every time. Such a great opportunity to watch.
Mikey Teo scoring a try in this one as well. Dan Pryor scoring a try, and then also coming off the bench, Thomas Marani, 2 try performance there for him, and Chris Bowman as well.
On the icing on the cake at the end of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, shifting over to the Chicago Hounds side of things. I mean, I guess the biggest player that we need to talk about here for this team is obviously Billy Meeks. He's a guy that was heading into the season as our number 1 consensus back, but obviously through work visa issues and him not being available at the start of the season, kind of faltered him in terms of him falling a little bit in our draft, getting drafted, I believe, in the 3rd round by Rugby Morning. But now, kind of similar to the LaRue Milan situation, it looks like now that he is starting to pick up his form, establish himself in the starting lineup here, he's looking like he is one of the best backs despite being on a struggling Chicago side.
Yeah, I mean, again, we talked about it last week. Mark O'Keefe, Billy Meeks, Bryce Campbell, these are guys that we can kind of trust to continue to play. I mean, you look at Mark O'Keefe. Mark O'Keefe also gets double digits with 13.3 fantasy points. And then you look at Bryce Campbell, 5.7 fantasy points, not as great, hasn't had that great past weeks, but three guys that you can kind of rely on to at least put some numbers up. And Billy Meeks and Mark O'Keefe are two guys that are, big parts of that.
Yeah, 135 meters gained for Billy Meeks, 22.7 fantasy points, like you said, Matt, a try assist, and 4 tackles. Yeah, I mean, it's this. Despite how the Chicago Hounds team, the result that they get at the end, I think you can be pretty confident with that back line in terms of slotting them in your lineup for the most part.
I mean, I would almost limit that down to just, Billy Meeks, Mark O'Keefe, Julian Dominguez when he comes back.
Yep.
And Bryce Campbell. And then the only other guy that I would look at Chicago side is Hugh Roach. I mean, 2 games in a row looking really good. It's great to see him back. 11.9 points last week, 8.9 points, 8.2 points this week. Again, I said it last week. The Chicago Hounds set piece looks good when they get an opportunity. It's just when they get those opportunities, that's what you're really betting.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, can we take a breath now? Man, what a week.
Take a breath. That was a lot of games. That was a lot of points. Let's get to the good stuff, Ryan. We're moving forward. We're looking forward. Let's get to it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, and just a quick update for all of our listeners out there. Top 5 players right now in Fantasy MLR. Nate Oxberger, obviously, like we said, absolutely killing it by far. 20 points more than the second place guy over David Coates. Nate Oxberger has 138.9 fantasy points on the season. David Coates coming in at 118.7. Joe Mono, even with that injury week where he was out, still up there as he continues to find that try zone. 117.9 points for him. Mika Kruse there at the 4th spot at 114. And then you got Jamison Faanana Schultz there sneaking up into that top 5. 108.9 fantasy points with Tom Florence not too far behind with 106.5 in that 6th spot. Pretty. Yeah. It's crazy. I only mention it, Matt, because how nuts is that top 5? None of those guys, none of them were guys that we thought were going to be in our top 5 heading into the season.
Yeah, we stink, Ryan. That's what I'm learning is that we just.
Fantasy MLR, it certainly is something. All right, let's start talking now about waiver wire, because I do think that outside of the weeks that we've had leading up to this round 9, I think there is some value to be had in terms of guys that you can scoop up, not even just as a streamer perspective, but guys that have outlook that could start making a fantasy impact moving forward that could help you during your playoff run here as we get towards the tail end of the season.
Yeah, look, I mean, now it's about, and this is the way that I've been going, is now it's about trying to factor in these bye weeks. I mean, you're looking at week 11 and 12. After that, I don't think that there's too many weeks after that until the last 2 week season, which is going to be playoffs at that point.
Yep.
Where there's where all the teams are playing again. So you got to start getting some guys in. If you have a one front row position, find a guy. If you can find a guy that you like that you can take a bet on, hey, pick him up. Find a place in your roster. If you need another 9 because the 9 thing is thin, pick up another 9. Try to get those spots now. But I think to that point, Ryan, we've got some guys here that can honestly be put right into your starting lineup.
Absolutely. And I guess, who do you want to start with? Who do you think is the top waiver wire ad heading into round 10?
Okay. I know that we talked about Luataro Bavaro. I know we talked about Pat O'Toole. But for me, the top waiver wire pickup is Colin Gross.
Okay.
I didn't expect to see him on the waiver wire this week. And he wouldn't be, and he shouldn't be. And the fact that you can get, the past 2 weeks, 9.8, 12.4 fantasy points from a second row, and the fact that he has been kind of throughout the week as a second row getting above 5 points is something that you love to see, and consistency that you will take out of a guy from the waiver wire. I think he's a guy that can definitely be, if not depth, somebody who you can plug in if he starts showing form for the rest of the season.
Absolutely. And yeah, Luataro Bavaro, I think, is another one there. You want to keep an eye out on how this back row of Old Glory DC shakes up with who they've been adding. But if he can kind of try to find his form, that would be interesting. Again, kind of volatile there, because really this is the first kind of really fantasy impact game that he's had since round 1 when they had that dominant performance against Chicago. Again, I think this is something you're going to be watching for. How does Old Glory DC progress here? Do they use this as kind of a momentum building win moving forward. Again, we're going to get into the matchups that are coming in round 10, but they do have the Utah Warriors coming up this week. A pretty tough matchup there. It'll be an exciting one, but can he do something against Utah? But what I will say is that after Utah, the Old Glory DC team does face the Dallas Jackals. So there is a chance for him to maybe establish himself even more there. But again, keeping an eye on how that back row kind of shakes out for Old Glory DC. And then Matt, you mentioned him. Any value in trying to put something down for Veroniki Tico Solomone heading into that was a tough one. Heading into round 10.
I mean, look, I think there's so many back three players that guys have already picked up. That I almost think if you need him, if you need a back three to start in this week, if you're thin on that position, put some fab down on him. But I don't think that he should be a guy that you are searching for. But, we've seen every week that he's played, he's been a guy that has been involved, has been able to get meters gained. I would say if you have guys that you would start over him, I wouldn't put too much fab in. If you're in need of a back three, I would definitely put some fab down on him.
And we've mentioned it before, kind of the what these different positions provide you. Again, back three position is a very volatile one. You're really banking on those, especially when you're outside of kind of the top tier back three players. You're really banking on these guys finding the try zone in terms of their fantasy production. That's not going to happen every single week. So again, as opposed to a back rower who is maybe a little bit more consistent because of the tackles that come with that, and then they add a try on top of that, that's where they can really explode. So I think this week more than others, there have been other positions outside the back three where there is value. There, Matt, like you mentioned, Matt, with Lautaro Bavaro and Colin Gross both being options this week as pickups. Last guy that I mentioned him earlier, Kurt Baker. I know he's a back three guy, but he's a guy that he's going to be the starter. He's the player coach for Old Glory DC, coming off of obviously the concussion stuff that he had he was dealing with over the past couple weeks. Impressive in his first start back here. He's a guy that's going to be in the lineup, and if Old Glory DC continues to kind of build off of this win against the New York Ironworkers, he could be an instrumental part of that with how much he was handling the ball there last week.
And I'm just going to throw out two more names. Very Vugokoto, 60-plus minutes as a front row, back-to-back weeks, over 5 points back-to-back weeks as a front row. You love to see it. That's definitely a guy that you may want to look at for some depth or at your starting front row position. Another guy, Martin Iosefo, coming off a big week for the Seattle Seawolves. They play Toronto Arrows this upcoming week. Could be a big week to pick up some Seattle Seawolves.
Absolutely. All right, let's now
segue into talk about next week.
Yeah, let's start talking about next week. Again, the results from round 9 couldn't have shaken up the standings even better, and that's going to have so much impact here heading into this round 10 week. I mean, you got basically a 4-horse race for the Western Conference, 3 playoff spots there, and then you got a 5-horse race there in the Eastern Conference, and all of them are eating up each other. I mean, you got Old Glory DC taking down New York Ironworkers, who are sitting in second. Rugby Atlanta beats the NOLA Gold, who pushes NOLA down to 5th. Just crazy stuff. And now Seattle's sitting in 3rd in the Western Conference because Utah coming away with them. They're right behind on the tails. It's crazy stuff here. And round 10 is obviously going to have a huge impact on that. So, let's have a look at some of these matchups and give our predictions in terms of what we expect here this weekend. No kidding. No kidding. But hey, we'll keep on trucking through, and maybe eventually, it's all about just hedging our bets, man. We keep on making the picks. Eventually, we'll get some of them right. All right, starting off on the weekend on Saturday, the New England Free Jacks taking on Rugby Atlanta at home, 3:00 Eastern time. If there's any confident team that you have here with the Eastern Conference, is this New England Free Jacks side that's been absolutely rolling right now. Yes, you mentioned, Matt, that Rugby Atlanta looks pretty solid, but I'm pretty confident with the New England Free Jacks in this one, especially off of an 80-point performance. You kind of look at two ways where, hey, maybe they kind of take the foot off the gas pedal a little bit, but I don't know. This New England Free Jacks team is rolling right now.
Yeah, I agree. And they're going back home, and they love playing at home. So I'm with you there. New England Free Jacks definitely going to be the winners here.
Yeah, and I think New England Free Jacks players stay in your lineup until further notice, regardless of who they're playing right now.
Yep.
All right.
100%.
Shifting over to now the second matchup, also at 3 o'clock Eastern time. I know how much you love that, Matt. But Old Glory DC at home once again, taking on the Utah Warriors. This one's going to be an interesting one, man, because obviously Old Glory is coming off of a big time upset win against the New York Ironworkers. They looked a lot, probably the best that they've looked so far this season. And then you look at the Utah Warriors, who have won, I believe, 4 straight, I think, and they're rolling through here. It's going to be an interesting one. If I had to put my money on it, I think this one is going to be a high-scoring one for sure.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Especially the way that this Utah offense looks, DC is just going to have to keep up. And, I mean, they had their flashes of brilliance, and I think they look really great at times. It'll just be how consistent can they be, because this Utah Warriors side has found a way to just continue to put the hammer down all game long. A big kind of matchup that I was just thinking of is going to be Jamison Fernandez-Schultz versus Lance Williams. They're both at that 6th position. It'll be an interesting matchup to watch.
Now, just there were pictures out there with Jama in a boot in the post game kind of festivities between the New York Ironworkers, and we don't have an update on that as of yet at the time of this recording this podcast, but that is definitely something to look out for. Maybe that lends to the Lautaro Bavaro pickup being even bigger because of that.
Yep.
Who knows? I will say this as we make our predictions here, Matt. Again, Old Glory DC has this habit of falling behind early against teams. We saw that at halftime in the matchup against the New York Ironworkers, down 24-12. I don't think you can afford to do that against this Utah Warriors team. This is a Utah Warriors team that is going to put the pedal to the floor for the entirety of the 80-minute match and is going to continue to try to continue to score points throughout of it. And I don't think that you have the luxury to get down early against this team. With that being said, I think the Utah Warriors come out on top in this one.
Yeah, this one's for you, Vandy, going the Utah Warriors.
Okay. All right. Shifting over to the last matchup of Saturday, 8:05 Eastern time, San Diego going to Dallas. Kind of a weird kickoff time there. But nonetheless, I think this is one pretty simple. You're playing your San Diego players. The only Dallas Jackals guys you're really looking at are probably Gala and Boyson.
Yeah, the ones that I have. Yeah, no, I agree. San Diego Legion guys, I mean, yeah, you're going to play your San Diego Legion guys. They're probably going to come out with a pretty big win here.
All right. Now shifting over to first matchups of Sunday, Chicago Hounds taking on NOLA Gold back home.
What is this?
This is going to be an interesting one.
Ridiculous, Ryan. Every time we go through the schedule, I continue to be baffled by the way that they schedule these things.
Yeah.
Saturday, 2 games at 3, 1 game at 8:05. What the heck are you doing between 3 and 8? That game's not even on the West Coast. It's in like Central Time. So what are we doing at 8:05? And then we got a game at 2 and 2:30 and 4. The 2:30 to 4, like, why do I need 2 games at 2 and then 2:30? Like, I can't keep up. I only have so many eyes and attention span. Anyway, sorry, Ryan. I can't hold it back any longer.
It makes sense. But hey, all right. This one will be an interesting one. I mean, I think NOLA needs a win here. NOLA needs a big-time win here. It'll be interesting to see. Again, you mentioned about the injuries. You really got to keep an eye out for that with this NOLA Gold team. What side are they putting out this weekend against Chicago? For NOLA, you're keeping an eye on that. For Chicago, again, hard to be confident with this team right now, but I think you can still be confident with those big 3 that we're talking about in that back line between Billy Meeks, Mark O'Keefe, and Bryce Campbell.
Yep, I agree. But honestly, I think with the NOLA Gold injuries, it becomes a tough one. This becomes a lot tighter game than we would think it is. And I think this might be the first week that I go against the NOLA Gold.
Wow. You think Chicago's going to get their...
I think I'm going to go with the Chicago Hounds this week. They're going to get their second win at SeatGeek Stadium against NOLA Gold.
Yeah, that's tough that you said that. I'll stick with NOLA. I'll hedge my bet there. Again, it's all due to injury. It's always tough to predict that stuff, but it's hard to really side with the Chicago Hounds team that just has been kind of struggling so far this season. Yeah. But hey, they continue to look better each and every week, so making improvements, which is good. All right, second game of Sunday, 2:30 Eastern Time, April 23rd. The New York Ironworkers are welcoming in the Houston SaberCats. This one should be an exciting one. I mean, the New York Ironworkers are looking to get back on track here. They've looked a little bit vulnerable here. Obviously, a lot of that due to injury. Houston SaberCats, they're kind of finding their form here. And after that big win against Dallas, this one should be a tight one on paper. But again, kind of like the Nola Gold matchup, it's really, I think, based on the injury situation that we're finding here with the New York Ironworkers.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's tough. They're missing a lot of their key guys. New York Ironworkers are missing Ed Fido, missing Jack Hyden. They're missing. I can't even think of who else they're missing, but they're missing a bunch of them.
Yep.
And it's tough on their side. It's tough to get set piece together. It's tough to have the timing right in the back line. Tough to have the timing right in the forwards. I'm going to go with the Houston SaberCats here just simply because of the fact of that. And the fact that, they're coming off a tough loss against Old Guard DC, and I'm afraid that this is just a tougher matchup.
Yeah, I'm going Houston as well in this one. All right, last matchup, and what a way to finish out the weekend. 4 o'clock Eastern time. The Seattle Seawolves traveling to Toronto. Hopefully, Toronto can not allow 80 points in this one. A perfect timing matchup for the Seattle Seawolves, though, who obviously have been struggling a little bit and maybe need a little bit of a tune-up match, kind of similar to the Dallas Jackals San Diego Legion matchup. I'm playing all my Seattle Seawolves players. I'm not touching any Toronto Arrows players this week.
Yeah, that sounds pretty accurate. Let's hope it's not another record-breaking loss again this week. Maybe it'll be 77-5 or something like that. So, no, we'll hope for a closer matchup. I think Toronto will step up and come out to play at home, but they're just another team that's riddled with injuries. It's clear that we're both going to Seattle on this one. But yeah, definitely stream some Seattle guys if you need to fill some spots.
And I mean, this is the name of the game when it comes to MLR. I mean, when we've talked with players before on this show, and heard from players on other shows as well, they talk about just how grueling the Major League Rugby season is and the physicality that this type of rugby typically brings, this North American style league, and just how long the season is. It is not, obviously it's a cliche. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon, but it's really at this point of the season where teams are really tested with their depth. And from a fantasy perspective, you're trying to find where you can find value in guys that maybe are taking advantage of certain situations, whether that be on opposing teams where maybe, hey, you're playing your Houston guys, you're playing your Seattle guys, you're playing, your Chicago guys because you think they can take advantage of a Nola Gold team that's injury riddled. But then you're also looking at those teams that are dealing with injuries and seeing, hey, who are the guys that are stepping up here that I could stream this week because, I don't have a certain player. And that may not be as difficult in this week when we have, all 12 teams playing, but come round 11, come round 12, when we're hit with Bye-Mageddon, and we got, 4 teams on bye, there are going to be streamers that you will need that week. And this is this type of stuff that you need to look out for.
Yeah, 100%. And hey, it's better to plan in advance so you don't have to make some tough decisions in the upcoming weeks of who to drop because you've already planned for it in the future.
If you got the roster space, definitely look ahead because there is going to be a whole bunch of difficult lineup decisions coming up in the near future. But nonetheless, we got an exciting round 10 coming up here. Full slate of matchups. Should lend itself to a whole bunch of different fantasy performers like we had in round 9. Again, super exciting stuff. And we mention it every single week. It seems like this season, especially from a fantasy perspective, has been the most fun season to watch so far in terms of the points that we're seeing scored and the new stats that we're tracking here. It's been an absolute blast so far in 2023. Yeah, halfway through the 2023 campaign, Matt, and remember our playoffs for Fantasy MLR start week 14. We're only 5 weeks away before that race really gets solidified, before we hit that first kind of bye weeks quarterfinal type round here in Fantasy MLR.
Yeah, and people better start catching up, or else they'll start running away with it.
There we go. Big talk for the guy that's sitting in first place. All right. If you're not following us already, make sure you're following us at the Fantasy Ruckers. Get all the latest updates when it comes to our fantasy league, when it comes to Fantasy MLR and everything else involved. It's been, again, super exciting stuff so far this season. Discord channel, link to that is down below as well if you want to talk more Fantasy MLR with some of our community members. Been a lot of fun there too. And hey, check thefantasyruckers.com for all the latest stats, fantasy stats, and regular stats if you're just a numbers junkie like we are here. It's cool to have that all kind of archived archived there at thefantasyruckers.com. So for Matt, for Ryan, this is episode 62 of the Fantasy Ruckers Show. We'll be back next week for round 11. But everyone, until then, enjoy an exciting round 10.
Love you, Vandy.
You've been listening to the Fantasy Ruckers Show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, covering everything rugby from the MLR and beyond. We hope you enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review, and be sure to tell all your friends. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, connect with us on social media at the Fantasy Ruckers. Till next time, this is the Fantasy Ruckers Show, signing off.